Maple Oak Estates looked like every picture-perfect American dream. Trimmed lawns, crisp flags, and driveways glinting in the morning sun. It was the kind of place where every mailbox matched, where kids rode scooters after school, and where the HOA rules came printed thicker than a Bible. Marcus Langley had worked 12 years at the auto shop to buy his home here. 42, a husband, a father, and a man who believed in fixing things, engines, fences, or family troubles. That morning, he was in the driveway, wiping oil off his hands, admiring the way the sun caught his old '67 Chevy Impala. It wasn't just a car. It was a promise to himself that he'd made it far enough to rebuild something that once broke down. His wife, Lena, stepped out the front door in her nurse's scrubs, holding a travel mug and a smile that made everything else feel right. "You sure you don't want me to drop you off today?" Marcus asked, pretending not to notice the dark circles under her eyes. She shook her head, laughing softly. "You got that alternator job at the shop, baby. Go handle it." He smiled, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive off down the neat, tree-lined street. For a moment, everything was still. Then, across the road, Richard Hale, the HOA president, appeared with his clipboard and coffee mug, walking like a man who owned the block. He glanced at Marcus's driveway, then scribbled something down. Marcus sighed, muttering to himself, "Here we go again." That evening, in the small HOA clubhouse, Richard stood before a few neighbors, preaching about community standards. He spoke with the kind of calm arrogance that sounds polite but cuts deep. "Rules are what make Maple Oak special," he said. "Cleanliness, order, pride, that's what keeps our property values strong." When someone mentioned a work truck being parked on the street, Richard's eyes flickered just enough toward Marcus's address on the clipboard. "We'll handle it," he said, voice smooth as glass. By nightfall, Marcus came home to find a white notice taped to his front door. It read, "Notice of violation, vehicle maintenance prohibited in driveway, $250 fine." He stared at it, jaw tight. "I'm fixing up a car," he muttered, "not running a business." He tore the paper down, but as he walked back toward the garage, he heard low voices from across the street. Two neighbors stood in the dark, whispering, their laughter soft but cutting. "They say his wife been spending time at the clubhouse," one said. "With Richard?" "No," the other replied, chuckling. "That's what folks been talking about. That's why he's getting all them fines." Marcus froze where he stood. The night seemed to hold its breath. The sound of crickets filled the silence as the neighbors walked away, leaving him alone with a rumor that burned like acid. The next morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, silent over a cup of coffee. Lena moved around the kitchen, humming faintly, oblivious to the heaviness in the air. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, "was just tired." He watched her closely, the doubt in his chest fighting with the love in his eyes. "You heard anything weird lately?" he asked. "Weird how?" she replied, frowning. "Just people talking." She shook her head. "Not that I know of." "You sure you're all right?" Marcus nodded but didn't answer. Later that day, more envelopes showed up in the mailbox, more fines, more warnings, unapproved modifications, driveway use violation. Marcus stood there, jaw clenched, as a few neighbors glanced his way and pretended not to stare. Only one person met his eyes, Tamika Jones, a young mother from down the street, walking her kids to the bus stop. "They hitting you with them fines again?" she asked. Marcus nodded. Tamika sighed. "They tried that with us too when my mama parked her car out front. That said it didn't fit the aesthetic." Marcus chuckled without humor. "Guess we ain't part of the aesthetic." She looked back toward the clubhouse. "Be careful," she said. "Folks round here love to smile to your face, then talk behind your back." That night, while the kids slept, Richard Hale sat alone in the HOA office. He flipped through papers, his manicured hand pressing a rubber stamp down on one fine after another. A younger board member hesitated at the door. "You sure you want to push this thing with the Langleys? They're good people." Richard smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Good people follow the rules," he said. He stamped another notice. "They'll learn." Back at the Langley house, the air grew heavy with silence. Marcus sat on the porch steps, the fading sunlight spilling across the yard. His kids laughed somewhere in the distance, chasing each other through the grass. He looked at his home, the white porch swing, the flower bed Lena planted, the cracks in the driveway he meant to fix next weekend. In that quiet moment, he thought about how long it took to get here, the long shifts, the side jobs, the nights spent dreaming of something stable. And now, this place that was supposed to mean peace felt like a battlefield he never asked to fight on. "We didn't come here for a fight," he thought. "We came here for peace. A house with a porch, a swing, a patch of grass. That's all I ever wanted." He looked toward the distant glow of the clubhouse, that small building that somehow held so much power over his life. But peace don't come easy when folks think your name don't belong on the deed. The wind picked up, rustling the paper notice in his hand. Marcus watched it flutter like a warning, and for the first time he realized this wasn't just about fines. It was about something deeper, about dignity, about who gets to feel at home. He stood up, his face calm but determined, as the night settled over Maple Oak Estates. The next week passed like a slow storm. Every morning Marcus woke to another envelope taped to his front door. Another small strike against the life he'd worked to build. One for his trash cans being visible from the street. Another for a non-conforming garden hose. It was always something, always one more way of reminding him that he didn't quite belong. No matter how clean the yard was or how perfect the lawn, at first he tried to brush it off. He kept his head down at work, came home, fixed the car, mowed the grass. But every night the same thought haunted him. Someone was trying to break him, not just with fines, with whispers. By Thursday, the rumor had spread beyond the shadows. He heard it in the grocery store when someone's conversation stopped as he walked by. He saw it in the way certain neighbors smiled too politely, the way one woman pulled her child a little closer on the sidewalk. The looks weren't cruel, just quiet. Pity mixed with judgment, the kind that cuts deeper because it never needs to be said out loud. That evening, Lena came home late from the hospital. The kids were already asleep. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of notices like they were eviction papers. She dropped her bag, tired but smiling. "Hey, baby," she said softly. "You been waiting up for me?" He didn't answer right away. "You been up at that clubhouse?" he asked finally, the words slipping out before he could catch them. She frowned, confused. "Clubhouse? What for?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Forget it." "No," she said, setting her keys down. "Marcus, what's going on?" He sighed. "People talking." "That's all talking about what?" He looked at her, really looked, and the pain in his eyes made her voice soften. "Baby, you don't believe that mess, do you?" He rubbed his face. "I don't know what to believe right now. All I know is Richard's been on my back every day, and somehow it feels like he got his hands on everything around here, even us." Lena stepped closer, touching his shoulder. "You think that man wants anything from me?" "Marcus, I see him at the meetings, same as everybody else. He don't scare me, and he don't run this house." Her voice was steady, but the tremor behind it was real. "I know," Marcus said quietly. I don't like what this place is doing to us." The next day, Tamika Jones showed up on the porch holding a clipboard and a determined look. "You got a minute?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "I've been talking to some of the neighbors," she said. "You ain't the only one getting hit with these fines. They did it to the Wilsons. Tried to say their wreath didn't match the community design standard. Then they fined the Smiths because their grandkids was playing basketball in the driveway. You see a pattern here?" Marcus folded his arms. "Yeah, I see it." Tamika flipped the clipboard around. "We starting a petition. We want the HOA to open their books, show where all this money's going and why certain folks get targeted." Marcus stared at her, surprised. "You think they'll listen?" She smirked. "They'll listen when half the neighborhood signs." He nodded slowly. "All right then, let's see what happens." That weekend, the whispers turned into noise. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, anonymous, unsigned, warning about community disruption and residents not upholding Maple Oak's values. The Langley's address wasn't listed, but everyone knew who it was about. Marcus found one wedged under his windshield. He stood there in disbelief until his neighbor, Mr. Carter, walked up the sidewalk with his cane tapping rhythmically against the concrete sun. "Mr. Carter said gently, you can't let small minds live rent-free in your head. I seen this kind of thing before. Folks get a little power, start thinking they can decide who belongs and who don't." Marcus exhaled, shoulders tight. "What am I supposed to do, Mr. Carter? They got all the rules, all the fines, all the control." Mr. Carter smiled, slow and wise. "They got control 'cause folks let but power don't last long when truth shows up. You keep walking straight, they'll trip over their own lies soon enough." That night, Lena sat beside Marcus on the porch. The kids were asleep again, the quiet thick between them. "You know," she said softly, "I used to love it here. The way the street looked at sunset, the sound of the kids riding bikes, the smell of barbecue on Saturdays." She paused. "Now I just feel like I'm being watched all the time." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what they want. For us to feel small." Lena turned toward him, her voice firm. "Then we can't let them." They sat there, hand in hand, watching the glow of the clubhouse light across the street, that single lamp that seemed to burn all night, like it never wanted to sleep. A few days later, the monthly HOA newsletter arrived. Glossy paper, pictures of manicured lawns, and Richard Hale's smiling face on the front. "Maple Oak stands strong," the headline read. Inside, under community announcements, Marcus's address was listed under ongoing violations. It wasn't just the fines anymore, it was public shame. By the time Marcus left for work, people were already glancing at him differently. One man he'd helped jumpstart a car for last year didn't even wave, but Tamika's petition was growing. Word spread that nearly a dozen homeowners had signed. A quiet murmur of resistance moved through Maple Oak, slow, cautious, but real. Late one evening, Marcus stood in his driveway again, holding another envelope. This time he didn't open it. He just stared at the white paper in his hand, then looked up at the clubhouse. "I'm done letting you scare me," he whispered. Inside the clubhouse, Richard Hale was watching through the blinds, a faint smirk on his face. He thought he'd won, but what he didn't know was that the neighborhood he'd spent years controlling was starting to wake up. The next HOA meeting was coming, and this time Marcus Langley was going to be there. The air was thick that night, the kind of summer heat that clung to your skin even after sunset. Cars lined the street outside the Maple Oak Clubhouse, their headlights sweeping across trimmed hedges and perfect fences as neighbors filed inside. Some came with coffee, others with folded arms and restless curiosity. It wasn't every day that the whole community showed up for a meeting, and everyone knew this one wasn't about landscaping or budgets. It was about the LANGLEYS. Inside, the clubhouse buzzed with low voices and the sound of papers shuffling. At the front of the room, Richard Hale straightened his tie and tapped his gavel on the table. His smile looked professional, but his eyes betrayed satisfaction. "Good evening, everyone," he said smoothly. "Let's get started. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight to discuss ongoing community concerns." Marcus sat halfway back, next to Tamika and her husband. Lena sat beside him, her hands folded tight in her lap. She looked calm, but her leg bounced under the table. Around them, whispers rippled like waves, names, rumors, and fragments of judgment. Richard began reading through the agenda, the usual talk about landscaping contracts, security patrols, and budget adjustments. But when he reached resident conduct and compliance, his voice sharpened. "As most of you are aware," he said, glancing toward Marcus, "we've had multiple violations from one household over the past several weeks. Maintenance in the driveway, noise complaints, late fees, and," he paused, dramatically, "certain matters of neighborly conduct that have raised concern among residents." A murmur spread through the room. Marcus's fists tightened on the armrest. He could feel the weight of every glance turning toward him. He stood up slowly. "You talking about me? Just say my name," he said, his voice calm but strong. Richard smiled politely. "Mr. Langley, we're not here to single anyone out. This is a community discussion." "Community," Marcus said. "It feels more like a trial." A few people shifted in their seats. Tamika whispered, "Stay calm." Richard cleared his throat. "We've received reports." "Reports from who?" Marcus interrupted. "Folks who don't like seeing a black man working on his car in his own driveway." The room went quiet. You could hear the ceiling fan spinning. "Now, Mr. Langley," Richard said, still smiling, "nobody's making this about race. We simply have standards. Standards that don't seem to apply to everyone," Marcus said, pointing toward another man in the room. "Tom across the street, been repainting his boat in his driveway for a week. No notice, no fine, but me, I can't even change an alternator without a $250 bill taped to my door." The crowd stirred again. A few heads nodded quietly. Richard held up a hand. "Please, let's keep this civil. This isn't about favoritism, it's about consistency." "Then be consistent," Marcus shot back. "Stop hiding behind paperwork and call it what it is. Bias. You don't like the way we live, the way we sound, the way we look. You fine us because it makes you feel in charge." Richard's face stiffened. "That's an outrageous accusation." Lena stood up then, her voice trembling but firm. "Outrageous is when my husband works 50 hours a week and still has to come home to fines for things that don't even matter. Outrageous is when our kids ask why the neighbors whisper when we walk by." Her voice cracked slightly, and the room fell silent. Even Richard's polished control faltered for a second. From the back, Mr. Carter's voice rose. "I've been living in neighborhoods like this since the 70s, he said. "Seen all kinds of ways folks hide behind rules to do wrong by people. Same story, different paperwork." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Richard banged the gavel sharply. "We are not going to turn this into a mob scene." Tamika stood up. "No one's making a mob. We're asking for fairness. We got a right to know why these fines keep hitting the same families over and over while other folks get a pass." She lifted her clipboard. "This petition got 24 signatures already. We want transparency. Open the HOA records." The energy in the room shifted. Neighbors who'd been quiet now nodded or murmured in support. Even a few who had avoided eye contact earlier looked uneasy, like they were starting to see what was really happening. Richard's voice rose. "You people don't understand how hard it is to keep order." Marcus cut him off, stepping forward. "Order? You call this order? You turning neighbors against each other over paint colors and mailboxes. You letting rumors fly while you sit back and smile." For a moment, the two men stood face to face, the homeowner and the president, two symbols of power clashing under fluorescent lights. Then Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the notices. "You can take all these fines," he said quietly, "and keep them, but you're not gonna take my peace, and you sure ain't gonna take my home." He dropped the paper on the table. The sound echoed in the room like a gavel of its own. The meeting ended in chaos, voices overlapping, some cheering, others muttering. Richard tried to restore order, but the momentum had shifted. The people had seen too much, heard too much. The illusion of fairness had cracked out outside. Marcus and Lena stepped into the warm night air. Tamika caught up to them, breathless but smiling. "You did good in there," she said. "You made Em listen." Marcus exhaled. "It didn't feel like they were listening to me." "They will," Tamika said. "They just needed to see somebody stand up first." As they walked home, porch lights flicked on one by one, quiet signals from neighbors who had stayed silent too long. Marcus looked around at the faces watching from windows and porches. Some smiled, some looked away, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone. When they reached their front door, Lena turned to him. "You think it's over?" He shook his head. "No, but I think we just started something." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the hum of a neighborhood no longer asleep. Somewhere behind them, in the clubhouse, Richard Hale sat alone at the table, staring at the petition Tamika had left behind. His jaw tightened as he realized control was slipping through his fingers. The next morning, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet. Lawns were still freshly cut, sprinklers still hummed before sunrise, and mailboxes still gleamed with the same forced perfection. But under that veneer, something had shifted. The whispers from last night's meeting hadn't faded. They had multiplied. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee that had gone cold. Lena moved quietly around the kitchen, her phone buzzing every few minutes with new messages, texts from neighbors who had been at the meeting. People who once crossed the street to avoid the Langleys, now suddenly offering support to Mika's message. Came through at 8:17 a.m. "Meet me at Mr. Carter's, you're gonna want to see this." Marcus didn't ask questions. He grabbed his keys, kissed Lena on the forehead, and drove down the street. Mr. Carter's garage smelled like oil and old books, a mix of age and memory. The old man sat at a workbench, a laptop open in front of him. Tamika stood beside him, scrolling through a folder on the screen. "About time," she said, when Marcus walked in. "You remember when I said something didn't add up with all those fines?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Well," Tamika continued, tapping the screen, "we found something." Mr. Carter turned the laptop toward Marcus. On the screen was a spreadsheet, rows and rows of names, addresses, and dollar amounts. HOA fines, stretching back nearly 5 years. But there was something else, a pattern. Tamika pointed. "Look at this. Out of 43 fines in the past year, 36 went to minority families or renters. Same line item every time. Aesthetic violation, improper storage, unauthorized modification, always vague, always subjective." Marcus frowned. "That's bad, but not illegal." "Keep scrolling," Mr. Carter said quietly. Marcus did. Then he stopped. The last column showed allocation maintenance fund, but instead of a community account, half the transactions had been redirected to a private LLC, Hale Property Solutions. "Hale," Marcus said, eyes narrowing. "As in Richard Hale?" Mr. Carter nodded. "He set it up 2 years ago, filed under his wife's name. Been moving HOA funds into it ever since." Tamika pulled out her phone and played a short audio clip. "And just in case anyone says this ain't real." The recording played, Richard's voice, muffled but clear enough. "No one's gonna trace it, Donna. It's under the company's name. The fines keep the fund full, and the fund pays the invoices. It's all circular." Marcus leaned back, stunned. "He's stealing from his own community." "Yep," Tamika said, "and we've got proof." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Then Marcus said softly, "If we go public with this, it's gonna blow everything up." "Good," Tamika said. "It needs to blow up." That afternoon they met again, this time in the backyard behind the Carter's house, where prying eyes couldn't see. They invited a few trusted neighbors, the Hendersons, the Changs, old Mrs. Warren from across the cul-de-sac. They passed around printouts, screenshots, and a copy of the recording. Mrs. Warren, who'd lived in Maple Oak for 25 years, shook her head. "I knew that man was too smooth," she said. "Always talking about community standards while driving a new car every 6 months. Question is," Marcus said, "how do we show this without giving him time to bury it?" Tamika already had an answer. "The HOA site has a community portal. Uploads go straight to the members before Richard can stop it." Mr. Carter grinned. "Rebellion through the internet. Never thought I'd see the day." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch long after midnight, listening to the hum of the streetlights. Lena came out and sat beside him, wrapping her robe tighter against the warm night air. "You're nervous," she said quietly. He nodded. "Feels like we're crossing a line." She looked at him for a long time. "You crossed that line the moment he disrespected this family. Now you're just making it right." Marcus smiled faintly. "Guess we'll see what right looks like in the morning." By dawn, it was done. Tamika uploaded the files at 6:43 a.m. The documents hit every inbox in the neighborhood. The recordings spread through group chats, Facebook groups, and community threads. Within an hour, the story had gone from rumor to revolution. Richard Hale's phone must have lit up like a Christmas tree. By the time he reached the clubhouse, there was already a small crowd waiting, cameras out, voices raised. Marcus stood across the street, watching from his truck. Richard stormed up the steps, face pale, shirt untucked. He tried to unlock the door, but someone had changed the password to the HOA system. His own board members were nowhere to be seen. One of the neighbors shouted, "You got caught, Richard." Another yelled, "Where's our money?" Marcus watched it unfold with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. The man who once held power over every mailbox, every lawn, every rule, was now the one being judged. Later that afternoon, a police cruiser pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. Richard was led out in handcuffs, his tie hanging loose around his neck. The neighborhood gathered silently as he was placed into the back seat. No one clapped, No one jeered. They just watched like a spell-breaking. Tamika walked over to Marcus, shaking her head. You think he ever thought it'd end like this? Marcus sighed. People like him never think it'll end. Lena came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. What happens now? He looked out across the neighborhood, the manicured lawns, the perfect fences, the place that once made him feel small. Now, he said quietly, we rebuild, the right way this time. The sun dipped behind the trees, bathing Maple Oak in golden light, the kind that made everything look new again. The HOA sign out front still read community standards enforced. But for the first time, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, those words might mean something real. The next few days felt like the air itself had changed. For the first time in months, the neighborhood wasn't whispering about Marcus or Lena. They were whispering about Richard Hale. Every driveway became a forum. Every morning walk a retelling of the scandal. The illusion of order that once ruled Maple Oak had been shattered like glass, but victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt heavy, quiet. Marcus knew that the same neighbors who avoided him before were now waving, calling out his name, even dropping by with casseroles or apologies. Yet he couldn't bring himself to smile. Because what Richard had done wasn't just corruption, it was manipulation. He'd turned people against each other. He'd made Marcus's question his own worth. And still, even with Hale gone, the damage lingered. 3 days after the arrest, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time they held it in the open on the front lawn of the clubhouse. Chairs arranged in a wide circle under the late afternoon sun. There were no closed doors, no microphones cutting off voices. Marcus and Lena arrived together. Tamika sat near the front, her arms crossed, her face steady but proud. Mr. Carter leaned on his cane, nodding at familiar faces. The crowd was bigger than anyone expected. People who had stayed silent before now standing tall, wanting to see change with their own eyes. The interim board chair, a young woman named Erin Douglas, stepped forward. Her voice was firm but sincere. We're here today not to point fingers, but to make things right. What happened was wrong, not just the theft, but the way we let power divide this community. We forgot who we were supposed to serve. There was a murmur of agreement. Erin looked toward Marcus. Mr. Langley, would you like to say something? Marcus hadn't planned to speak, but something inside told him this was his moment. Not to gloat, not to accuse, but to heal. He stood slowly, the crowd turning toward him. I moved here because I wanted something better for my family. A place where my kids could ride their bikes without worry. Where people looked out for each other. He paused, scanning the faces. But somewhere along the line, we let fear take over. Fear of difference. Fear of standing up. We let rules become weapons. And that's not what community is. Lena reached out, squeezing his hand. Richard Hale didn't just steal money. He stole trust. But we can take it back. Not by fighting, not by dividing, but by remembering that every one of us built this neighborhood. We pay the same dues, mow the same lawns, pray for the same peace. We built this place, and we belong here. Applause began softly, then grew, rising into a standing ovation that rolled through the crowd like a wave. For once, it wasn't applause for defiance, it was for healing. Weeks passed. The HOA announced new elections and promised transparency. The bylaws were rewritten with input from residents. The fines stopped. The endless emails about aesthetic compliance vanished. For the first time, the community newsletter featured photos of backyard cookouts, kids' lemonade stands, and block parties, not just warnings and penalties. Marcus helped repaint the clubhouse with a group of volunteers. Tamika organized a neighbor's first weekend, where everyone pitched in to clean plant and rebuild what had been neglected. Even Mrs. Warren brought her famous peach cobbler, saying, "Figured y'all earned something sweet." Late one evening, Marcus stood at the edge of his driveway, watching his kids play under the streetlights. Lena joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. The faint sound of laughter drifted from across the street, the kind that had been missing for too long. "You think it'll last this time?" Lena asked quietly. Marcus smiled. "Only if we keep fighting for it." She nodded, and they stood there together. No more fences between them and the world. A few days later, Marcus received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just a handwritten note inside. It read, "You didn't just change this street. You reminded people what right looks like." An old neighbor. He looked up, scanning the neighborhood, the same one that once made him feel like an outsider. Now it felt like home again. That Sunday, the community held its first unity cookout. Long tables lined the street, filled with food, laughter, and stories. There were no sides, no divisions, just people. The smoky scent of barbecue filled the air. Kids ran with sparklers, and old songs played from a portable speaker. As the sun dipped low, Erin stood to speak. "We've had our reckoning," she said, smiling at Marcus. "Now we build something better." Marcus lifted his glass of sweet tea. "To community," he said. The crowd echoed him. "To community." The lights twinkled overhead, catching on smiling faces, proof that even the hardest battles can end in peace if people stand together.